we will now move to the next presentation, which is by Shri Arvind V. Iyer ji. He'll be presenting his paper on Guṇatraya in the Gītārthasaṅgraha, a polymathic reading from Kāśmīra. Introducing Arvind ji. Mr. Arvind V. Iyer has a research background in computational neuroscience and biomedical engineering. His interests as an independent researcher include Indian languages, appreciation of classical performing arts, and contemplative practices. We welcome you, Arvind ji, and look forward to your presentation. The stage is all yours.
Om Tat Sat. This presentation is about the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, as treated in the Bhagavad Gita commentary called the Gītārthasaṅgraha by the renowned Kashmir Shaiva thinker Abhinavagupta. Next slide, please. The term guna is familiar to speakers of most Indic languages. Guna can refer to a mental disposition or temperament, or in the ordinary physical world refer to characteristic behaviors of objects or materials. More formally, the guna concept is traced to the Sankhya school of philosophy, which recognizes two fundamental realities. The first of these is the soul, or the dweller within the body, or that which can be called I in English or aham in Sanskritam. This is denoted by the term Purusha. Everything else that can meaningfully be called this in English or idam in Sanskritam is denoted by the term Prakriti and refers to the body and the world at large, which the soul or Purusha inhabits and experiences. The means of Prakriti binding Purusha, or the means of binding soul to body, are what are called gunas, which is apt considering how guna means cord or bond besides quality. This bondage of soul to body is said to occur in three modes. Through the pleasant brightness of knowledge, or the sattvika mode, the tendency for activity motivated by results, or the rajasika mode, and the tendency for ignorance and inactivity, or the tamasika mode. When all these modes of bondage are released and the soul is no longer bound to the body, that is liberation of the soul. This basic concept of liberation is not exclusive to Sankhya Darshana and is adopted across darshanas and sampradayas, and very prominently in Srimad Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita has been the subject of numerous commentaries. A Bhagavad Gita commentary has been the traditional medium for exponents of any school of thought to proclaim their school's position with regard to the nature of the soul and bondage and liberation. And the Kashmir Shaiva school was no exception to this. Today we'll speak of how the Gītārthasaṅgraha, a Bhagavad Gita commentary from the eminent Kashmir Shaiva thinker Mahamaheshwara Abhinavagupta, deals with the topic of how the bondage of the gunas is overcome and liberation is reached. This is a topic of ultimate human interest in all of Indic thought and culture, and is rendered distinct in a distinctly Kāśmīra voice in the Gītārthasaṅgraha. Considering Acharya Abhinavagupta's staggering contributions across disciplines from Tantra to aesthetics, the Gītārthasaṅgraha is a relatively brief work. The very name Sangraha in the title suggests that this work has the nature of a digest or a concise summary, unlike a bhashya, which is a more extended commentary. But even in such a concise work, the topic of gunas and the gunatita state of liberation receives pronounced emphasis. Abhinavagupta's mark as a polymath of encyclopedic scholarship is seen in this work in a somewhat unusual way. Instead of a torrent of details about the varieties and dynamics and drama of the gunas from the multiple disciplines of his expertise is seen in what details he chooses to ignore as he keeps his eye and our eyes on the final prize, the Gunatita state of liberation. A literary feature of the Gītārthasaṅgraha is the presence of summary verses or Sangraha shlokas at the end of each chapter. This is striking since most Bhashya-style commentaries are almost exclusively prose works. The distinct voice of Abhinavagupta rings most clearly in these verses. Next slide, please. Let us begin by hearing in Abhinavagupta's distinct voice what is the essential teaching about the Guṇatraya in the Bhagavad Gita. Lasad bhakti rasavesha, hina hankara vibrama, sthitopi guna sammarde gunatita samoyati. Suffused with the essence of bhakti, devoid of egotism and confusion, the sage who has gone beyond the gunas is hailed in this verse as staying steadfast, even amid the stampede of the gunas. This is the final goal to be reached, and the rest of the presentation is devoted to how Acharya Abhinavagupta shows us all the way to the goal. Next slide, please. We will begin by considering each of the gunas in turn, starting with tamas. While all three gunas are causes of bondage, tamas is most associated with the perpetuation of bondage. Please note that in this and future slides, the numbers in parentheses refer to the Bhagavad Gita chapter and verse locations corresponding to the Gītārthasaṅgraha excerpts. So for the three defining characteristics of tamas given in the Gita, pramada or negligence, alasya or laziness, and nidra or sleep, Abhinavagupta gives his own working definitions to help aspirants clearly recognize and remedy them. The negligence to watch out for is the waste of any moment of this precious human birth, which is our best opportunity for liberation yet. The laziness to watch out for is delay in good deeds. Sleep is a state of total lack of any of the redeeming qualities of this birth, and hence something we should be most watchful about lapsing into. In the state of ordinary wakefulness too, tamas is present as ignorance. Even activities that otherwise have liberating potential, like yajna, dana, and tapas, sacrifice, charity, austerities, if done under conditions of ignorance of Shastra, are said to be tamasika and lose their liberating potential. In the grip of tamas, any effort towards gaining knowledge also is thoughtless and driven by impulses. Contentment is not a well-earned state and has nothing to do with actual accomplishment, and happiness is recognized only in sloth. Acharya Abhinavagupta goes as far as equating the guna called tamas to avidya itself, the primal ignorance which is the fundamental cause of all bondage. According to him, the asuri sampat, or the demonic inheritance which Bhagavan speaks of in chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita, is nothing but tamas. Next slide, please. The guna called rajas is what the Bhagavad Gita declares as having both kama and krodha, desire and anger as its aspects. Notably here, the Kashmir recension of the Bhagavad Gita has a few verses on the topic of kama and krodha in the 3rd chapter that are absent in the current critical edition. While commenting on these verses, Acharya Abhinavagupta provides a list of characteristics which can help aspirants recognize and remedy rajas in its expressions as kama and krodha. Rajas as kama or krodha operates in the sense organs, in the mind and the intellect, but is not detectable by the sense organs themselves. It carries the false appearance of happiness. It is expressed as pride and vanity about things like one's birth origins and antecedents. Importantly, it compromises even virtuous actions like yajna, dana, and tapas, which lose their beneficial qualities if undertaken with desire or vanity. When in the grip of rajas, efforts towards gaining knowledge are driven solely by the pursuit of pleasure. Contentment and happiness are both tied to material desire fulfillment. Such contentment and happiness are therefore of an insecure and inferior kind compared to what sattva has to offer. Next slide, please. Sattva, on account of being a guna, is a cause of bondage like the other two, but is the sort of bondage that still in some ways resembles liberation. Sattva is said to be recognized in operation when the sense organs function as channels of knowledge and learning. Therefore, even to access the guidance and understanding for how to reach liberation, sattva must be operative over the other two gunas. Yajna, dana, and tapas, which are compromised when undertaken under ignorance in tamas or desire in rajas, have their liberating quality uncompromised only when undertaken in sattva. When sattva prevails, efforts towards knowing all lead to a perception of unity. Contentment is based on the secure foundation of yoga discipline and not on the vagaries of desire fulfillment. Happiness in conditions of sattva has resemblances to ultimate liberation. The adjacency and compatibility of sattva with liberation is much emphasized by Abhinavagupta. He equates sattva to vidya itself, the fundamental means of liberation, and calls the Daivi Sampat, divine inheritance spoken of in chapter 16, as nothing but sattva. Next, please. The gunas have been studied one by one to recognize their distinct properties, but the purpose throughout is to overcome what is the common effect of all the gunas, bondage of the soul to the body. Throughout the Gitārthasaṅgraha, there is clarity that the gunas are all of Prakriti alone and not of Purusha. The bondage that is expressed through karma and rebirth and so on are all functions of this Gunamayi Prakriti alone. Purusha is like a lame person who can only witness what goes on, carried on the shoulders of a blind person, that is Prakriti, who can move and act but cannot witness. The gunas of Prakriti in the dance of karma and rebirth are all studied only with the purpose of eventually transcending them. When unbound from the gunas, Purusha attains a state like that of Ishvara or Bhagavan, the primal Purusha who is not bound by karma. A sutra from the Patanjali Yoga Sutra is apt to recall here, though Abhinavagupta himself doesn't explicitly mention it. Klesha karma vipakashe aparamrishta Purusha Vishesha Ishvara. For the attainment of that state, which is Gunatita, beyond the gunas, a clear pathway has been highlighted by Acharya Abhinavagupta. Next slide, please. One condition, if the journey on the pathway to liberation is to even begin, is to avoid negligence and laziness at all costs. In the plain reading of the Bhagavad Gita, the future course of a soul towards liberation or further bondage is decided by which guna is dominant at the time of death. Most commentators tend to stick to this plain reading, but Abhinavagupta offers a different reading and an important piece of advice here. According to him, what determines the future course of the soul is not the guna that was coincidentally dominant at the instant of death, but the guna under whose dominance the efforts of the person were most concentrated throughout the lifetime. So he advises anyone interested in liberation that throughout the lifetime, our efforts must be concentrated within periods of sattva dominance. Whatever effort towards liberation is undertaken is to be undertaken without the sense of I am doing this, and with the understanding that one is only witnessing the gunas of Prakriti at play. It is in this context that Abhinavagupta presents what in modern times is most often called the message of the Gita, of engaging in karma unselfishly, giving up any desire for fruits. The most effective means to achieve detachment from the sense of doership and fruits of action is to dedicate oneself wholeheartedly to the one being who is unbound by the gunas and karma, which is Bhagavan or Ishvara. He is very clear about how every thought and feeling is to be dedicated to this supreme being, who must be thought of as someone you can serve with love, rather than as a being beyond all thought and feeling and actions and attributes, like, say, the Advaita Vedanta conception of Nirguna Brahmatattva. Next, please. Acharya Abhinavagupta gives several one-line self-reminders or verbal affirmations as aids for aspirants to maintain alertness and morale on this path to liberation. Here's just a quick assortment. While undertaking any effort during everyday life or social transactions, say, this effort is just an occurrence in my body, according to the nature of the body and senses, and I do not seek the results of it. When the guna dominating our experience alternates from one to the other, say, these are only bodily states which cannot perturb me. When motivation for engaging in new actions presents itself, say, what do I gain by this indulgence? Let me abide joyfully in the soul always. Next, please. So far, we saw from the inside what the Gitārthasaṅgraha has to say about gunas and transcending them. This is a quick view of the commentary in the context of other Indic schools of philosophy. Throughout the treatment, we see terminology from the Patanjala Yoga Sutra in use, such as Chitta Vritti, Klesha, and Abhinavesha. While dealing with the question of how the Gita's counsel for karma phala tyaga can be followed in a way that is compatible with Vaidika injunctions for yajna, etc., Abhinavagupta accepts and recommends the reconciliation presented in earlier Purva Mimamsa scholarship. The Uttara Mimamsa or Vedanta schools are, of course, the ones with the most visibly extensive tradition of Gita Bhashyas. Here is where Acharya Abhinavagupta stands with regard to the positions of Vedanta commentators on the nature of the Supreme Being and the ultimate means of liberation. He exhorts bhakti towards a personal God as a fundamental means of liberation, in contrast to making an impersonal Brahma Tattva the center of thought, as we have already seen. Next, please. While the appeal of the Gitārthasaṅgraha is remarkably free of sectarian limitations, the language and imagery are unmistakably and grandly Kāśmīra Shaiva. A statement of Krishna on how he reveals himself via Prakriti is translated, as it were, into Pratyabhinya Shaiva terminology by Acharya Abhinavagupta. Krishna speaks as Ishvara, who has himself manifested as samsara, or the phenomenal world, as a means of anugraha or grace for individual beings, via his own vimarsha shakti, which is his inseparable potency for self-awareness. The Bhagavad Gita's 17th chapter, the Shraddhatraya Vibhaga Yoga, declares the significance of the utterance Om Tat Sat. And Acharya Abhinavagupta passes this utterance in Pratyabhinya terms as follows. Om is a state where the entire phenomenal universe has subsided back into the Supreme Being, or the state where Shiva is in the Vishwottirna Avastha. Tat is the Ichha Swatantriya, or the free will of Shiva, to present in the world or beyond the world as he pleases. Sat is a state where the Supreme Being is present as the world itself, or the state where Shiva is in the Vishwamaya Avastha. It is around this vision of Om Tat Sat that Acharya Abhinavagupta centers his vision of the Gunatita state of liberation. Next, please. It is fitting to conclude with Acharya Abhinavagupta's vision of the state of liberation and of the Supreme Being in his own words. Tena paramam prashantam rupam puraskritya ditsa yaksha titapsatmakecha taranga sangatam cha madhye kritya dana yajna tapa kriya karaka kalapa paripurna yat charamam vapu idam ullasitam etat khalu samam tritayam anargalasya swabhavikam rupamiti kasya kim kutah kena phalam syad. The supremely calm presence of Om Tat Sat is what is beheld by one who is Gunatita, while in the midst of Yajna, Dana, and Tapas, which all occur in a desireless way, as if they are the radiant dance of a sanctified body, not plagued by such questions as what, whom, when, where, and how. Om Tat Sat. With that, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Nagaraj Karu? Arvindji, I really was completely like hooked to every slide and whatever you were saying. I found it very, very gratifying, and the way you presented also, I mean, I don't want to get into the content of it, but it just vibed with me so much and resonated that I was like completely immersed into it. So thank you.